Round 4, I'm playing a 2150, 2.5 out of 3, one brilliant move in this game, and 88% accuracy. My opponent has played c5 his entire career against e4, and let me tell you, I prepared about 2-3 hours against this, and 30 minutes before the round, I saw that he played this once in his career, and sure enough, he played knight c6 in this game. This is the Nimzovich defense, so I go with d4, and here my opponent straight up goes with d6, which is kind of what I expected. And I'm just gonna be honest, I saw a game by Pentala Harikrishna, the Indian super grandmaster, that's 27-30. He played this really nice setup with white, and I literally replicated it and had a small advantage. So we're just gonna go pretty quick. I just developed really rationally. Here I went with d5, which is what Pentala Harikrishna played, forcing the knight back to b8. The knight wants to reroute eventually back to b8 or to c6. h3 to prevent knight g4 things on bishop e3. Thank you, engine, no more feedback. Castles was played, now I go castles as well, and now h6. I hated this move for black in the game because as the moves go on, bishop e3 developing, e5 takes en passant is forced, of course. Bishop takes e6, and now I go queen d2, and that's why I hate h6. First of all, it lets me gain a tempo in my development with queen d2. So you have to play king h7 or h5, and you have to do a move that you don't want to do. Second of all, the king is off of f7, which means that this is a further weakness for later on in the game. Now I go knight d4, trying to take the bishop pair, bishop d7, and now I go f4, taking the space. And look, my opponent has just been out-prepped, okay? He didn't think that I would be this prepared or this confident against the Nimzovich. He's played it once in his career, and he thought, I'm gonna play this surprise against my opponent who's lower rated, and it's just gonna be an easy ride. During this opening, he's playing gradually slower than me. I'm playing maybe in 15 seconds, and he's grunting a little. Like, obviously his body language is not maintained because he's a bit, he doesn't like the space that black has. I mean, let's just flip the board, a little horror show. I don't love it either. Let's flip back to me, okay. I mean, this knight is crying, this rook isn't even developed, it's tough time. So knight c6, I go bishop f3, my position is lovely. Rook e8, so I go rook ad1 with some true espionage cheese. This rook is like a double agent, or is like a spy straight up in Russia from the US, or a Russian spy in the US, however you want to see it. a6 is played. And now I take a 10 to 15 minute turn. There's something I didn't tell you about this game. At 2 moments in this game, I calculate 15 to 20 moves deep, like for each opponent, meaning 40 moves total. Twice, at 2 different moments, and twice it kind of worked out. So after 15 minutes, I go with this move e5. Try to calculate, try to think for me for white, and I was fairly confident when playing it. There's many variations. Let's go with the dumb ones. If knight g8, which is actually the best move, I just create an isolated pawn on d6. If d takes e5, I have knight takes c6, which is what I played in the game. By the way, I was so disrespected, like I took this personally. My opponent did not look at my masterpiece that I calculated for 15 minutes and played this in below 2 minutes. I was insulted. From there on out, I took it personally and I said I'm winning this game. Knight takes c6, which is a tempo move on the queen, so you have to take back. Bishop takes c6 happened in the game, but if b takes c6, pardon, I have f takes e5, and on rook takes e5, I had bishop d4, which is really nice. The rook must defend the bishop, and now I have bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, and bishop takes c6. And here I have a double attack on these 2 bishops, and after bishop takes c3, I just take with the pawn, and this is a pinned bishop, and I win a piece. So here my opponent went with bishop c6. By the way, all of this I saw before e5, and I'll keep saying that until I didn't see it before e5. Bishop takes c6, and here I have this forced line which I trade off everything so that this rook is off the defense of the c5 pawn, and finally I cannot take on c6 because black has this really nice e takes f4 attacking both my bishops, and I didn't like this line. So I take here on e5, and now you can't take my bishop because now I take this. Both your bishops are attacked at the same time. Bishop takes g2 does not work to king takes, and I'm up a piece, and I defend this pawn. So you can't take my bishop, you can't touch my bishop, and that's very important because that means you need to move the knight in this position. I saw all of this before e5. Knight d7. There's also a very nice line, knight d5, in which I saw knight takes, bishop takes, and okay, my friend pointed out that I have rook d1, c6 and c4 GG's, which is kind of sad, like I'm winning. I saw bishop takes, rook takes f7. If rook takes, I have bishop d4. You can't defend the bishop on g7. This discovered check doesn't do anything, king f2. And you can't take, the bishop is pinned, I'm winning a bishop. So you can't take my pawn on e5, king g8, and now I have e6. And I thought white is better here, white is better here. Saw this before e5, this didn't happen. I go e5, my opponent goes knight d7, I take on c6, b takes c6, creating a load of weaknesses on the queen side, which is a source of advantage. But not only that, I'm winning a pawn flat out. By the way, we played this in real life as fast as I'm playing this on the board. Like, this happened really quick. Again, I was disrespected by how fast my opponent was playing, like not respecting my calculation at all. But it's okay. I took it personally, and it is what it is. Rook takes f7, knight takes, and rook takes c7. I saw all of this before e5. I actually saw knight c4, and it's gonna sound silly that a player that sees 20 moves in advance cannot see that bishop c1 and everything's defended. But in my head, you have to understand, I forgot that this bishop was pinned, and I literally thought I would lose a piece to bishop takes c3. You can laugh, b takes, and rook d1 check, winning my bishop. So I didn't play bishop c1, which is the best move, maintaining a pawn up. I played bishop f4, which is a slight mistake because bishop c1 is better. And now g5, I played bishop g3. Imagine that, bishop c1 is still the best move in that position. King g8 getting out of the pin, and I take on c6. Now I have two pawns up very fastly against a 2150. Knight takes b2, and now I go knight e4. I don't like these rook d2 things, so I go knight e4, getting out of this pressuring weakness, the knight on c3 that's barely defended by my rook, which means that my rook is liberated. My rook is threatening a6, my rook is threatening rook d6 with trying to trade rooks, and my knight is activated. So I love the knight e4 move. It wasn't the engine's favorite. The engine likes this, the engine likes this, which I'm not a fan of. So knight e4 for the win. Rook d1 check. Here, king f2 I didn't love because of check, king here, and just some annoying things on this g2 pawn. The engine actually says king g4, which I hated. I hated that idea because I lose a pawn, like, unless I want to draw here. But here, king f5 says the engine. So on check, I went for king h2, which is way less good. And now it's more equal, even though I'm still a pawn up. Bishop d4, threatening a draw. I go h4, as I saw. And now my opponent goes with bishop g1. You see, you can just trade pawns and be okay with that, but now black has taken their only defender of the king outside of the king's defense, and this pawn is weak, and maybe this can be good for white. Although you're not doing yourself any favors, even though that's the best move. You kind of have to admit to defeating your whole plan with this bishop g1 drawing threat, which is a terrible, weak threat in my opinion, because it's easily defendable. But bishop g1 is played, king h3, and now rook d4. And my opponent is playing hope chess, in which if I go knight c5, it's checkmate. Please. I felt disrespected too after rook d4, I have to admit. It just made me more angry. Knight f6 check is what I played. King f7, and now knight g4. And I was so confident after this move because it's a critical moment in the game in which I win a pawn. I'm threatening h6. If you go h5, I go knight h6 check, king here, and I take this pawn for free with a pass pawn, almost protected. GG's. You can't defend this pawn with king here because of bishop e5. My opponent plays g takes h4. Checks exist in chess. Beautiful here is that king e7 or king g7 do not work because of knight f5 check winning the rook. So king e8, and I take on h4. My opponent goes rook c4, trying to trade rooks. Rook d6, the best move, threatening checkmate. My opponent defends with rook d4, and now I can go rook takes a6 because my opponent can't take on c2 anymore. So now I'm 3 pawns up in this endgame. Feel like $1 million. My opponent goes knight d1, which I didn't see. And this gives a win for white. And I can go knight g4, which I missed actually, covering completely this knight's squares. Instead, I was a little distracted, and I went rook e6 check, king moves, and I thought I had a win with rook e1. That forks these two, or traps this bishop, that's what I thought. But there's rook takes h4 check. And here this is a draw, like white fails. King here and bishop f2. It's really important you see this before playing these moves. And so now I go with rook f6 to just defend against f2. And I lost part of my advantage because now, because I defended this, black has the initiative. Black goes with rook d2, attacking this pawn. I go with rook f8. If you take rook d8 and I win the knight, so knight f2, I take, bishop takes. And I was taught this not 3 days ago, that bishop and rook is better than knight and rook, because these are two far away long distance pieces, while this is a short distance piece and this is a long distance piece. Knight f5 was played. I like knight f5, but knight g4 is apparently better. I didn't look at it because it's just not a good looking move. It just blocks my pawn. My plan, so in the endgame, my biggest advice, plan over your next move. Okay, your plan needs to be better than your next move. So my plan, I reckon, is better than this move here. Knight f5, clearing the way for this pawn and centralizing my knight around this bishop, so this bishop looks like trash. Already can't play these 4 moves. I sack a pawn and now I go rook a8. I need to keep this pawn to win. So king e6. And now I really like this part of the game, okay? It's my favorite part of this game because this is the part of the game which I was less confident to win, because I just gave back a pawn, which was a source of my advantage, and I'm feeling less good than 5 moves ago. But here I see something really nice. I treat this endgame as if all these pieces are off the board, which means that this is a king endgame, and in this king endgame, it is winning for white if white does not play g4, because then king f6, and then king g6, and it's a draw. So white would have to go in the king endgame, king g4. And that's what I played. I think that's a really smart way of looking at this endgame. Bishop c5 was played. I go through with my plan. I defend my pawn on g2. King f6. Okay, my plan is to go, if you do nothing, which is probably what's gonna happen, king g5, g4. King g6, g5. Like my king and pawn are storming through like a train. King f6, now I do check, and now king e5. It's an interesting kind of move order, because now my rook is on a6 instead of a8, which changes some things. So I go king g5, and now bishop b4. I think with the plan of bishop d2, doesn't matter. In this position, I'm about to play g4 when we go with our second time that I calculate 15 moves in advance. 15 moves. And I took 15 minutes in a position in which I had 35 minutes, so it's almost half my time. See if you can solve it. White to play. Rook e6 check. Whoa, 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 whoa. Not only is this a really nice way to liquidate into a winning endgame, but it's also what we call in chess a fortress, in which king takes e6 is forced. If you go king d6, I have knight e3 check with the fork, king takes, knight takes, and this is a better version of the endgame that was achieved after king takes. Knight d4 check, another fork, king here and knight takes. So it's just a trade of rooks, but it's so much easier to win this without the rooks on the board. So here it's scary, but I calculated everything, and this is what I calculated. Bishop d2, I also calculated bishop e7 check, but it's the same thing. Basically, the bishop has one move to control this g5 square for this pawn to march through. And the idea is that king f5 and I shoulder this king c4, and now I can go g4. And if king c3 now, I had calculated g5 sacrificing my pawn, and if you don't do anything, which is like bishop c1, I can go g6, bishop h6, and like king f6, like always sack my knight. And if you take my knight, which is the obvious thing, I can go a4, king b3, and now g6. Threatening g7, which means that I'm queening, so you have to take up this square on g7 with bishop h6 or bishop c3. And now my pawn is in front of your king, and you can never catch up. You can never take it with a bishop because I have g7, king b4, a6, king b5, a7. And now we calculated here that this is 15 moves of calculation that I did before rook e6. My opponent on g4 played a little scare, bishop c3, which is not that logical. Like, it just lets me push my pawn up more and your king is just slower. king d3 now, and now I go with g6. And the idea is that I don't need to threaten g7 with g8 to force your bishop move. The idea is that my knight and pawn here form what we call in chess a fortress, which means that if there's no bishop and no pawn, let's say you sack your bishop against this pawn, the king can never get to this pawn and can never draw the game by proxy. If you take this knight ever, I go a4, a5, a6, and I'm in front of your king. If you go king c3 and king b2 and don't take my knight, I go a4. If you try to attack my pawn from the front, my knight and pawn make a fortress here, preventing your king from entering. The second you go on the second rank, making this very basic, now I can go a4, a5, a6. Bishop g7 was played, and now I just play the fortress game. Knowing that, you, the audience, knowing that we can just afford to play king e6. In my opinion, sacking my knight twice in a row, every time I sack my knight is a brilliant move, but chess.com does not correlate with that. It is what it is. It is what it is. King e6, king takes e2, and a4. My opponent resigned. I used a lot of anger in this game because my opponent disrespected my calculations so many times. Even on this one, oh my god, let me tell you. On rook e6, he played takes so immediately and so confidently, it was disrespectful. Maybe he calculated it on my turn while I was thinking for 15 minutes. But it doesn't matter.